The Holy Gospel according to John. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." And some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees. Nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here's an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. All right. Gosh, I feel like this requires a couple preambles. One, it probably takes only certain kinds of mud to heal. My guess is some kinds of mud could get you into some trouble. But you're right. That is one of the things that God uses and makes us out of in the first place. There's so much opinion in the middle of this gospel. It's notable, like Jesus is like at the very beginning and at the very end, and he's not physically present anywhere in the middle. Very much like our situation, where we're here, like he did his thing, physically present, and now, he's present in things like this gathered group, this word proclaimed, this bread and wine, but not like Jesus in this. Anyway, and then we anticipate his coming back to set things right and make things clear. So what do you think? Did Jesus heal the man born blind because he was a particularly good man born blind? Like a particularly excellent specimen of maleness or humanity or blindness or ethically superior in some way? In a sense, these questions are the flip side of the questions asked by the disciples. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Am I good enough to make God do something? Am I bad enough to make God do something? But it's really two sides of the same coin. As Pastor Amy has taught us now for decades, is there anything we can do to make God love us more or love us less? No. There is nothing you can do to make God love you more or less. Which would actually be a point of despair if God didn't already love you. But God does, because God is love, overflowing, unfathomable, upending, renewing, completing love, creating us, holding us in existence, sustaining us through all our changes. As Martin Luther put it long ago, it's not that we're so lovely that it creates God's love. God's love is so complete that it creates us, that it makes us beloved. It creates us as beloved. We are the overflowing of God's love. Well then, did Jesus heal the blind man so Jesus could feel good about himself? Did he do it to impress God the Father, to make sure that God the Father was right with him? No. Everything was already right between him and God. So right that it's right to say he was God. And he gives his rightness to be ours through no rightness of our own, but only, again, from the fullness of God's love. So why did Jesus heal the blind man? Well, per Jesus, speaking in the gospel, in order that the works of God might be revealed in him. And in one sense, it often takes special action, like miraculous action, to just get our attention, to see that God is active in our world. But in a deeper sense here, that it might be revealed that God always was at work in this man, that he is God's work, always was love, before and after the miracle. He is God's work. This is a message deeply at odds with almost literally everything we take in day to day, moment by moment, all day, every day, through phones, computers, billboards, rumors, sideways glances. Rob Saylor is interim dean of the faculty at Christian Theological Seminary, and he was my housemate at the commuter house my first year of seminary. And he puts it well in his book, Theologia Crucis, which is Latin for theology of the cross. He says, the average American views hundreds, if not thousands, of advertisements every day between internet, television, t-shirts, magazines, etc. What is the goal of such advertising? The main goal of advertising is to poke a tiny hole in our lives, a hole that can then be filled by the product on sale. If you put these two facts together, then the psychological picture that emerges is one in which most of us are walking around having thousands of tiny holes poked into our self-image, our sense of happiness every day. The word satisfaction comes from the Latin satisfacere, and it literally means to make enough. That is, to be in a condition in which one feels that one is enough. And this gets in the way of sales. If I'm satisfied with my blue jeans, I'm threatening the sale of Levi's. If I'm satisfied with my car, I'm of concern to Toyota. This is not to say that Toyota or Diesel or the government or anyone else is evil, though, because they too are caught up in the system of having to sell in order to survive, in order for people to feed their families. This is not us against them. This is us against ourselves, and that's a spiritual problem. I think that's really well put from Rob Saylor. It's us against ourselves, and that's a spiritual problem. So my mother-in-law's sense of humor has gotten quirkier lately, but in a way that carries wisdom. And I was wrestling with this gospel, the man born blind, and I shared something about that, and she said, why don't you look under your bed? Maybe you'll find it there. It was so non sequitur. It set me back a step. But darned if my mind's eye didn't flash on darkness. And funny thing to flash on, darkness. But childhood fear of what's under the bed, or on the chair, or around the corner in darkness. A now old movie, Monsters Incorporated, made great use of this experience that most of us have. But how this relates to the way that the Pharisees in our gospel represent our fear, our tendency to try to control our fears by thinking we know what we don't know, and supporting that by imagining someone else as the problem. We know this Jesus is a sinner. You, blind man, were born entirely in sin. And you're trying to teach us? Well, the second thing that popped immediately to mind, and this was all in a flash after my mother-in-law's creative, provoking suggestion, which I mentioned to illustrate and remind us how God opens our eyes in surprising ways. The second thing was another quote from Luther. A theologian of glory calls evil good and good evil. And he's focused on the ways that a theologian of glory sees our works and our impressiveness as signs of God's blessedness and the reason why we deserve the various things, which then turns us away from God's works and God's goodness. And also sets us on a cycle that we'll talk about a little more shortly. A theologian of glory calls evil good and good evil. A theologian of the cross calls a thing what it actually is, which is a way of summarizing Luther's own flash of insight that if you're doing good works in order to please God, to set yourself right with God, not only can you never know if you've done enough, not only are you constantly on the spin cycle of the world's dissatisfaction and your own disappointment, but even more, if you're doing works in order to get something, even if it's God's approval, you're not actually doing it for love. If you're doing works in order to get something, you're not actually doing it for love, which breaks the first commandment and the one like it. Love God above all and your neighbor as yourself. Prosperity gospel, the thought that we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, is all nonsense. Which, oddly, the phrase, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, ought to make clear. If you're standing on the ground, pulling on your bootstraps, you're never going to rise 1 inch off the ground. Unless you're just magic. And this religion is not about magic. It's about love. It's about grace. Love, to be love, has to be free, has to be grace. If you're paying for it, it's probably not love. If you're getting paid for it, same. Jesus doesn't heal the blind man because the blind man earned it. He doesn't do it to make himself feel better either or to set himself right with God. He does it that we might see the work of God in this man, who is already God's beautiful creation, if we just have eyes to see. Returning to Rob Saylor, a theologian of the cross calls a thing what it is. Why? For Luther, it is for this reason. On the cross, God takes the form of what is ugly. Jesus was a peasant carpenter, an itinerant teacher from a backwater town who briefly engaged large crowds for a month or so, eventually fell out of their favor, and was crucified as a criminal by the Roman Empire, one of the most shameful deaths for a Jew or for anyone. God's truth in Christ took the form of what the world found ugly and pathetic. Theologia Crucis, theology of the cross, is combat theology against God images that support the status quo when the status quo is demonic. There's a shift, an eye-opening, cross-shaped shift that has to take place of seeing that God's love, and ours too, has to be free, has to be grace, to be love. I'm stepping off page briefly. I got to say, it was really weird to be paid to do this work. And my sense is that honestly, if you're paid by the church to do a job, it's mostly you're being paid so that you can make your house payment without having to do other work. So you can devote all your time to what you've been wanting to do for free and what you have been doing for free. I don't know if that makes a kind of sense, but you kind of become a ward of the church so you can work for free. When that gets out of whack, you got some returning to the cross to do. This shift is a thing that once you see it, it's not the world that changes. It's the same exact world. But your experience of the world changes. Bathed in the light of God's love, there's nothing to earn, nothing to prove, just an opportunity to love, to serve from love, and to be grateful. So to help us hold that thought and to finish, I want to teach a very short song I learned online. It's in my recent attempt to figure out how do you use Instagram for evangelism. But this little song is just, it's awesome. It's sung on this thing by a little boy. I don't know where he's from. And there's a guy with a guitar just listening. And then the next time through, the guy plays along and they're singing together. And it goes, Lord, I thank you for sunshine. Thank you for rain. Thank you for joy. Thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day. Hey. All right, let's try that. I thank you for sunshine. I thank you for rain. Thank you for joy. Thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day. I thank you for sunshine. I thank you for rain. Thank you for joy. Thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day. Beautiful. Amen.